Mm-hmm.
This is longer than usual. Is your video glitched or it's just me? Oh, we are glitched.
Mine is going.
Yeah, I only see myself and you, Evan. I don't see anything else on the other screen.
Yeah,
I see Evan and Joe and myself, but I don't see Kevin.
Okay, mine says starting event. This might take up to 15 seconds.
Okay, so we're all stuck. Chelsea says try leaving and coming back in.
Okay.
I guess I just closed the window.
All right, Joe, you're still here, right?
Yes, I'm still here. Yep, there's stuff. Okay.
All right, and we're missing Kevin, but I think Kevin's coming back in. Can everyone see us? I think we're live. I think this is good. Okay, I'm going to assume that we're live, unless Chelsea says otherwise. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I see that you're already taking to the chat to share a little bit about yourselves, where you're signing in from. Feel free to continue to do that and share in the chat. I saw a couple questions about the recording of this meeting. It is being recorded. It will be shared after we've completed. So we're going to jump right in here, and I'm going to start with some introductions. So first and foremost, I'm Stephanie. I'm the research director at the Microdosing Collective. I'm also a neuropharmacologist. We've got Kevin Lenaburg here. You can wave to us, Kevin. He's the policy director at Clusterbusters and also a co-founder of the Psychedelics and Pain Association. We have Dr. Evan Lewis, who's a neurologist and medical advisor to the Microdosing Collective, amongst many things. And finally, Joe McKay, who is a retired NYC firefighter from the FDNY. He's a 9/11 healthcare advocate, a military burn pit advocate, and a board member of Clusterbusters. And today he will be with us to share his personal insights with living with cluster headaches and the role that low-dose psychedelics have played in his care. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to start by talking about cluster headaches. What are cluster headaches? What is the difference between a cluster headache and a migraine? And Evan, I think you can kick it off for us and talk to us about these types of headaches and why they're so difficult to treat and what might be missing from standard care.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks, Steph. And it's great to be here. And what an interesting topic for all of us. I'm excited to hear what both Joe and Kevin have to say as well. I've been eagerly anticipating being here today. So first off, just to set the stage for everybody. So what is cluster headache? So the first thing we do in neurology, it's really important to distinguish between what we call primary headaches and secondary headaches. So secondary headaches are headaches that result as a cause of something. So if somebody has a traumatic brain injury and has changes to the structure of their brain from something like that, you might have headaches as a result. That would be a secondary cause, because then you would have headaches as a result of the traumatic brain injury. Another thing might be like a tumor a tumor can cause increased pressure in the brain, and so then you would have headaches as a secondary cause to the tumor. So when we're talking about cluster headaches, they're a special type of headache that is actually classified as a primary headache disorder, meaning that we don't have an underlying cause for them. And it's a very severe headache disorder. So the thing that distinguishes cluster headache are its qualities. What are some of the qualities of a cluster headache? They come in clusters. That's one thing. So these can be repeated headaches that occur for weeks to months, interspaced with these periods of remission. And then how this headache appears or feels to individuals in general is they tend to be one-sided. They can use around the eyes or the temple. And the other feature is that they have this very sudden onset, very intense element to them with the stabbing or burning pain. And this is where they get that name as a suicide headaches, because the pain can be so intense that it really can make you think of thoughts of suicide. And I've had some patients who do describe them as being that intense. What also is very important about these headaches is that they trigger a very specific set of associated symptoms. These can be things like tearing out of the eye, a redness of the eye, runny nose, blocked nose, sweating on one side of the face, a drooping eyelid. And then the other quality of them is that people feel very restless. They want to move around, walk around, and that could be secondary to the pain. So these are features. You don't need to have all of these features to have cluster headache, but that kind of describes them typically. And then the important thing is to compare them to another headache condition, another primary headache condition, like migraine, as you mentioned, Steph. And the main differences there is migraines, they can vary in their pain intensity. They can go from moderate to severe. They tend to be more throbbing in nature. They last a lot longer. That's one thing I didn't mention. Cluster headaches are anywhere from about 15 to 180 minutes, so 15 minutes to about almost 3 hours. Whereas migraines will be 4 hours to 3 days, and it can switch sides, and it doesn't have that very localized location like cluster headaches. The other thing that you see with migraines that you typically don't with cluster is there's nausea, vomiting, light, and sound sensitivity. Those are kind of more typical of migraines as well. And then the last kind of distinguishing characteristic from migraine or cluster, as I mentioned, people with cluster headaches tend to want to walk around. They're very restless, whereas people with migraine want to seek solace in a dark room, lights off, lie down, and rest. So those are kind of the two major headache disorders and some distinctions between them.
Thanks for sharing that. Cluster headaches impact 1 in 1,000 people globally. And so this conversation is really important. I'm really pleased to know that there are more conversations like these that are shedding light and advocating for better research, more treatments. And it seems like some evidence is coming to light that the use of low-dose psilocybin and possibly other psychedelics is on the rise and could be very beneficial to people who do suffer from cluster headaches. And so we have Joe McKay here with us today. He's going to share a little bit about his story and the role that microdosing and psychedelics have also played in his care. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you. And thanks everybody out there for tuning in here. My name is Joe McKay. I'm a retired FDNY firefighter. Many of you, I'm sure, were old enough to remember September 11th. That day was the worst day of my life, and for a lot of us, I think we could say the same. The day of September 11, 2001, I was off duty. We had a fundraiser that day, FDNY fundraiser out in Staten Island. When we got word about what was happening downtown. Shortly after the second plane hit, we knew it was no accident, and a recall was given. I made my way into Lower Manhattan, and what we saw there was horrific. Worked for 2 days around the clock, and a list came out shortly after, and 343 firefighters were killed. On the list, 26 of them I knew pretty well, and 4 were from my company. I spent 6 months at Ground Zero, working on the pile while working in a firehouse. And if we weren't there, we were taking care of the families of the people that we lost. And 6 months out, after going to funerals daily and thinking things can't get any worse, I woke up at 1 a.m. feeling like someone had just stabbed me in the eye with a burning hot ice pick. I know there's some people with cluster headache on this call. You all know what I'm talking about. That pain, like, oh my God, what's going on in my head right now? I must be dying. The pain is this intense. I ended up in the emergency room, and a few hours later, the pain went away. And, I went home with no answers. I think they gave me a diagnosis of unspecified migraine was the terminology. Next night, 1 o'clock in the morning, again, same time, I got hit again. After a few more nights, I just stopped. I gave up on going to the emergency room because there was nothing much they could do there. No matter how many shots of morphine or whatever painkiller I was getting there was doing absolutely nothing. 6 weeks later, I got diagnosed. I was lucky to get diagnosed 6 weeks later because the average time for someone with cluster headache to get a proper diagnosis is over 5 years. So there I was thinking things couldn't get any bad, and now I get the diagnosis of cluster headache, and there's not much I could do about it. I had steroids and triptans is how I got by for some time. For 10 years, I tried a whole list of medications that were pretty horrible, had horrible side effects, and basically did little to nothing. The only thing that would give me relief would be breathing in 100% oxygen for about 15, 20 minutes. The triptan drugs, I did not really work well. I was only able to get pills, and usually I would vomit from the pain, and then I'd get nothing from the pill at all. 10 years, I coped with it, but it got to the point where my doctors all agreed that I couldn't work anymore. So I had to retire from the fire department after only 13 years. Did not sit well with me. I love that job. I still miss it every day of my life. And I say it's the best job in the world, and I really mean it. So I lost my career. In a way, I lost my identity as well. I struggled for a while with treatments, and I had back issues and other issues that doctors were giving me opiates for. I got hooked on the opiates. And I was just cruising. I was taking the opiates to feel numb. 2015, I found out online that psychedelics could be a treatment for cluster headache. So I tried. I got some, and I tried for 2 years. I used a low dose for a while. I didn't have any attacks at that point, so I couldn't say whether it worked or not. But when I ran out, that time of year, the cycle came back, and I got hit pretty hard. I had a stretch of 7 months where I was getting almost 8 attacks a day during the peak of that cycle, and I started thinking about taking my life. I reached out to Clusterbusters, and they told me what I was doing wrong. The prescription medications I was taking were interfering with psychedelics working. So I had to wean myself off of tramadol and Oxycontin in 2 weeks to try psilocybin with no meds in me, and it worked. It stopped the attacks the next day. I had an experience after that. Not long after, while I was using, dosing with psilocybin, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I could see for the first time that I had PTSD, and that I needed to get help. Fast forward to today, I've done a lot of work with the underground therapist in New York City. I still go to therapy, and I still use low dose psychedelics to treat my cluster headaches, and I am in a whole lot better position now. I can actually live my life. I don't live day to day with the fear of the next attack. And I know some of you out there that have cluster headache know what I'm talking about, but psychedelics have given me my life back. I don't say that lightly. They've healed me physically and emotionally and mentally. And I'm here, I'm working with a great team. We're trying to bring this to the masses, not just for people with cluster headache, but for people that are suffering with chronic pain and many other conditions as well. So thank you all for coming and listening and learning about cluster headache and psychedelics.
Thank you for sharing that, Joe. What an amazing story. And we're so glad that you found Clusterbusters, that you found a treatment that actually worked for you, and that you're using, you know, this story, this incredible story of yours, and really trying to advocate and educate, because this is what's needed to get the message out there to the masses. You touched on something that I thought was very important as well, where, you know, psychedelics like psilocybin can be used as a pharmaceutical agent or treatment for the pain and the headache itself, but there's an opportunity here to also heal the psycho-emotional side. You mentioned PTSD, but also just living with the pain of these headaches, with the anxiety and the anticipation of the attacks and the cycles, that can really do a number on our mental health, on our quality of life. And so I see psychedelics as this opportunity to not just address the pain and the physical symptoms, but as also body, mind, and spirit medicine, which is really important in this case. So thank you. So you talked about Clusterbusters. Clusterbusters, you know, has been gaining a lot of mainstream traction, which I'm so happy about. But they have been around for decades, I believe. And Kevin will be able to tell us more about that. But Clusterbusters supports all treatments, but especially champions alternative treatments like psilocybin for cluster headaches. And Kevin, who is the executive director of Clusterbusters, is here to talk about their important work, to shed light on what patients are reporting, and much, much more. So take it away, Kevin.
Thank you. So it is a fascinating story, the history of Clusterbusters. And for anyone who wants to really dive into it, a book was written and published last year. It's called Psychedelic Outlaws. And Chelsea, if you can throw that a link to where people can purchase that online, that would be great. And basically it was a group of people with cluster headache back in the late 1990s, early internet chat rooms, who were all discussing living with this really painful, challenging disease, sharing, like I'm seeing in the chat right now, what has worked for them, asking each other questions. And there was a lot of exploration of people willing to try unique and different things to deal with this condition that medicine wasn't really addressing. People were taking massive doses of water. They were eating hot peppers, all types of interesting things. And one individual with the amazing nickname of Flash, he got a cycle every year, and one year his cycle didn't happen. So of course he racked his brain trying to figure out what changed. What did I do differently this past year? And the only thing he could come up with is that he had done some LSD. So we shared that in the chat group, and some people definitely immediately pushed back. You know, that's just another crazy idea, can't be related. But then some other people started doing some research, and they saw that a lot of the headache medicines that are out there are working on the serotonin receptors. And that's the same receptors that are primarily being worked on by psychedelics. And some of the medicines were actually derived from or similarly shaped to these psychedelic substances. So people said, well, maybe there is something here, started looking into it more, started experimenting on their own and reporting really remarkable success with psychedelics. And out of that, they started doing a whole thing, trying to figure out what protocol worked best, which substances, how they interacted with other medicines. And it's this amazing example of citizen science. People, again, that medicine and pharmaceutical research had largely been ignoring because it's such a small population, figuring out for them. Ultimately, they created in the early 2000s a nonprofit organization called Clusterbusters. And that's the combination of cluster for the cluster headache and busters, which is the term they came up to use for busting when they're in a cycle, and primarily using psychedelics to do that. So we've been doing a lot of research ever since, working with great universities, Harvard and Yale primarily. And I'm going to share some results of what we have learned from our community, from survey data. This is a snapshot of things that are not yet published, but it's what we're learning, and we're working to get this information published likely in 2026. So let me share my screen here. Just a second as this loads. As it does so, Joe, do you want to say anything else about Clusterbusters?
Yes, I know a lot of you on this call, I see from the chat, have cluster headache. Please reach out to us. We'd love to connect with you and share and share stories and share what's working for you, and maybe you could help somebody else out, another cluster head in your area. So please reach out to us.
Excellent. And can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so in 2023 and 2024, Clusterbusters did the Cluster Headache Medication and Psychedelic Use Survey. And we collaborated with Dr. Mark Burish, who is a neurologist and pain specialist at the University of Texas Health Houston. And he sees a lot of people with cluster headache. He is a great researcher. And the purpose of this study was to ask people living with this condition what medicines and other treatments they're using, how effective those are, and really drilling down into the details of what dose they're taking, what schedule they're taking on, and trying to learn from our own community. Now, looking at the data, it was about 2,000 people who responded to the survey. And sometimes people feel like, oh, your Clusterbusters community, those are all people who are using psychedelics. But that's really not the case. Of our survey, about half, a little less, said that they are currently or have ever used psychedelics for cluster headache. So the slight majority had no experience with psychedelics, but we're able to do comparisons on what people reported, both those who have used psychedelics and not, across a full range of medicines, devices, and whatnot. And the results are really striking. So this is looking at how people actually, that is not showing the slide I want to show. Just one second. I'll show it this way. So this is a chart showing the efficacy of psilocybin on the left-hand side, and then the three substances on the right-hand side. And I've seen a lot of these mentioned in the chat here. Prednisone, which is a steroid, galcanezumab, which is a CGRP medicine originally developed for migraine, but it did get an indication for cluster headache, and verapamil, which is a borrowed medicine that is also used. And so if it's rated as completely effective, 100% elimination of attacks, that is the darkest blue, 75 to 99%, the next darkest blue. The lightest blue was moderately effective, at least 50% reduction in cluster headache burden. And you can see psilocybin compared to these other three standards of care is rated about twice as effective as those other substances. So what our community is telling us is that psilocybin is by far a more effective treatment. Now, we're very clear, if anyone has found a treatment that works for them, whether it's a medicine, whether it's a device, whether it is a psychedelic substance, we support that. We support anything that works for anyone. But to help people who are struggling, they haven't found what works for them yet, this data, we hope, can point in the direction of where people can and should explore. So that's the efficacy. Looking at the dosing. So we asked people how much they were taking, and this is for the preventive or maintenance use. People who get cluster more frequently, maybe they are chronic and they are taking it on a schedule. And the highest amount on the left-hand side is 0.5 gram of dried psilocybin mushroom. And while there's some debate about what exactly microdose means, I think most people would agree that that is a microdosing amount. But a key lesson that we have for a lot of the community, because people tell us, I tried microdosing psilocybin or some other psychedelic and it did nothing for my cluster headache. And what we've learned and what we see from our community is many people find it takes a larger dose. Most people are not doing a full dose, normally considered 3.5 grams of dried mushroom or 3 to 5 grams. But you can see there's a sizable number that's doing 1 gram, 1.5 grams, or 2 grams. So a common way that we recommend people approach this is starting with that 0.5 gram dose, seeing if it's effective for them, and if not, then working their way up. The most common way that people use is a pulse regimen, where you take a dose, you wait 5 days, you take another dose, wait 5 days, take the third dose, and that's considered a pulse, and see if that is going to be effective. And you might need to adjust the amount as you do that pulse. Looking at the overall effect of psychedelics in people's lives, you can see here, it's not just about reducing the cluster headache. More than 50%, those first couple of bars on the left-hand side, talk about it improves their overall quality of life, improves their emotional well-being, their mental health, and it helps them to reduce their use of prescription medicines. So it really has a positive effect in people's lives. I'm going to try seeing if I can go full screen here so we can see a little larger from this point forward. Okay. So looking at something that's new, this is data that we have just collected based on reports, again, from the community about their use of DMT as an acute treatment. So by meaning acute or abortive, that is, you feel an attack coming on, and most people are either turning to oxygen or triptan injections to help in that moment. So this study was done with Dr. Emanuel Schindler at Yale University. She has done clinical trials where it's randomized, looking at psilocybin in these same low doses for both cluster headache and migraine. And we have her published results on the Clusterbusters website for anyone who wants to dive into what those show. But the long story short there is, on these small groups, they found significant differences in improvements, people using psilocybin compared to placebo. Again, this was asking our community, primarily Clusterbusters, but others who are online with cluster headache, about their use. And this is a relatively, well, the substance has been around for a long time. It's relatively newly known in the community as something that people could use as an abortive treatment. So you can see about half have used it for a year or longer, another half have less. So full honesty that this is new experiences, new data. And asking people about DMT, the most common way that people are using it is inhaling it via a vape pen. And when people use that, here's what they tell us about the efficacy, which is quite remarkable, that 2/3 say that it eliminates their attacks 100%, and another about 20% say 99% for 75. So you've got 80% here saying that it is 75% or more effective at stopping their cluster headache attacks. Looking at how quickly it works, and this is some of the challenges with a triptan shot that can take 10 to 15 minutes, high flow oxygen. There's varying reports on how long. Some people respond more quickly, still often takes minutes for it to stop the attack. And while that attack is coming on, the pain is ratcheting up, the anxiety is ratcheting up, but the DMT seems to be able to have effect much more quickly, with more than half reporting that it works in under 30 seconds. And how consistently is it for you? So we've got almost half, 44%, say it works almost every single time. Another third who say it works almost every time. So it's really high numbers, or percentages, I should say. And it's worth noting that this is only 90 people who have answered this question. So it is still a relatively small population. Keep that in mind. We know that there are a lot of challenges for people getting access to DMT, and that limits people's use of it. But those who have managed to get access are reporting really great efficacy, and it's something that we want to be exploring further in clinical trials and understanding better. And the last thing here about amount. So I think with DMT, it would be common for people to take, if they're looking for a psychedelic experience, 3 to 5 inhalations. And of course, an inhalation is a imprecise measurement. Depends on how deeply people are breathing, how long they are holding it in. But you can see that about a third, 31%, are doing a microdose amount of just 1 inhalation. People report either no psychedelic effect or a very light psychedelic effect, or then you've got another 36% doing 2 inhalations. At 2, people are starting to report more visuals that come along with it, but less intense than what many people report from larger DMT trips. And that is the presentation there. And I will stop so we can talk more about this.
Thank you so much. That was so complete and really interesting about DMT. It's interesting to see how there could be an abortive treatment, because that is probably one of the main concerns is that once it comes on, that train is going to leave the station and there's not much that we can do about it. You did also mention this relationship between the pharmacology of these medications that we're traditionally using for headache and migraine and cluster headache that target the serotonin receptors. And so I just wanted to highlight again that both conventional medication and serotonergic psychedelics are exerting, their effects through the modulation of the serotonin receptor system, particularly 5-HT1 and 5-HT2 subtypes, which is very interesting. And it seems like we do need a lot more research to understand exactly mechanistically and pharmacologically what is actually happening, because we understand that low dose psychedelics, higher dose psychedelics are regulating pain and inflammation through this serotonergic system. We understand that there's an anti-inflammatory effect. We know that the immune system could be modulated as well, right, through pro-inflammatory cytokines. I won't get too much in the weeds with that, but it seems like there's a lot more left to delve into. And so initiatives like yours are definitely, highlighting all of this and highlighting the importance of fundraising to do more research. And on the question of research, I'd love to speak to you all about the research that we have ongoing with the Microdosing Collective, and then also Evan, who has been extremely supportive and is co-PIing this research with me, to also just shed light on what the current state of research is now. What are we doing? What do we need? And I think we can dive into that now. So we at the Microdosing Collective have designed an observational survey. It is looking at the population of chronic headaches. And so correct me, Evan, chronic headaches, 3 or more headaches per month times 3 months.
So I think you may have lagged there, but you did for me, Stephanie, so I'll just repeat it, what you said. So yeah, the definition of chronic headaches is more than or equal to 15 days of headaches. 15 days of headache per month, where only 8 of those days are migraine days. So they don't have to meet migraine. So, people who have chronic headaches, even cluster headaches, can have other variations on the theme, or just small headaches that they might call tension type headaches, as an example, that don't fully meet criteria. So when it comes to migraine, the definition is, more than 15 headache days per month for more than 3 months. And if we're talking about migraine, you have to have 8 headache days of those being migraine, of the migraine quality. So that's just, again, when we come to these definitions and these specifics, these really come from research standards, because we've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere in order to understand the patient population that we're talking about. So that's where these specific numbers come from.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's really important about knowing, this information is that it can help us track if there's a reduction in headache days, and if people are finding success with psilocybin and LSD, particularly for our survey. And so our survey is available on our website. Chelsea will share that, and we would so much appreciate if you would participate, if you fall in this category of chronic headache, if you have tried psilocybin or LSD during this time where you experience the chronic headaches. It would be very supportive to us, and hopefully to science and research, to be able to document whether this has been successful to you, what your experience has been, what kind of doses you've tried. All of this information is very, very valuable to us. And, our research is not the only research out there. I think Evan could give us a little bit of an overview of what's going on and what the science is really saying when it comes to these types of headaches and the potentials for psychedelics.
Yeah, and just before I get there, Seth, I think you raised a really good point, or at least you were noting the use of DMT as a treatment for cluster, and kind of where that came from, and me as well. That kind of it's striking, not surprising. But the point I think I want to make is that these types of survey data is so important to kind of open up the ideas to then allow researchers, medical doctors, scientists, etc., to go forth and kind of study these things a bit more particularly. So the anecdotal reporting of individuals is key to kind of drive the process. I'm going to just give an example here of where this goes ultimately, because psychedelics and our research here is still really nascent and kind of growing. But I've also done a lot of medical cannabis work for years, and people were coming to me even before I started, really diving into it more than a decade ago, talking about how inhaling cannabis, certain chemovars of cannabis, were aborting their migraines. And I was actually prescribing both oil forms and kind of inhaled forms of cannabis for individuals with chronic headache and who would have acute exacerbations at times. And when you're using oils are good, but it just takes a long time to be absorbed. So oils would be more for chronic prevention, whereas something like inhaling cannabis would be more for the acute prevention. So you're kind of seeing the same thing playing out here with Kevin's data when it comes to cluster headache, and kind of you can extrapolate that to migraine. And so kind of to bring the story to an end, just this year at the American Headache Society, I believe the abstract that won the award for kind of best innovative science or something in that category was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial using inhaled cannabis to treat acute migraine. So it went from kind of being dismissed by the neurology community and not being really well taken to now receiving awards at the American Headache Society, which is one of the biggest headache gatherings of international headache researchers and clinicians in the world. So this is just where, but it all came out of the study, the survey studies and patients speaking and sharing their experiences. So that's just a real life story to emphasize the importance of kind of our survey, Kevin's surveys, and other surveys that are out there, and to encourage people to participate, because it really does lead to good things in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that being said, I'm not going to go into too much detail regarding what's out there with the research, but I'll kind of give some high level points, what we know at this point in time. The field of microdosing research is expanding, and it really has kind of grown even in the last few years. If we had to zero in on what we know kind of in terms of headaches and microdosing, we can talk about cluster headache and we can talk about migraine, because that is where the current data seems to be in these particular headache disorders. So overall, there isn't a lot. And when I say this, I'm speaking specifically about very well controlled clinical trials using humans, where you would have both a treatment group and a placebo group. And these trials are very complex to run. They cost a lot of money. So ultimately, it takes time to run these. But these are the gold standards upon which ultimately are used in order for medications to be approved at the level of the FDA in America, or Health Canada in Canada as an example, and other regulatory bodies in the world. And so, these trials are of the utmost importance, but we have to always remember they're very structured, and that they're structured, we have to take into account what it is they actually produce. And so they will give us information on one hand, but again, the anecdotal data, the survey data, the observational data is also really important. And a good clinician and someone who's really looking at this will synthesize all the information out there to come to conclusion. So when we're just talking about the clinical trials and those that are the very high level structured trials I just mentioned, predominantly these have been done with psilocybin and LSD. And overall, the most important thing is the trials have shown that they are safe in headache patients. So that's kind of the first hurdle we want to always get by, to make sure that people who have migraine and cluster headache aren't having an unnecessary or amount of side effects or a large amount of side effects. When it comes to the reductions in frequency in pain in controlled settings, it looks like in both migraine and cluster headache that microdosing does have modest reductions. The only problem is when we look at the trials that have been done to date, all the samples are small. And when we look at the different trials, the way they've gone about doing the trials is different. Some are like single dose of a small amount of psilocybin. some were, a few doses over a few weeks. Ultimately, what these trials have been showing are really strong placebo effects and what we call expectancy effects. People go in with high expectations, and it seems to be confounding the data right now. So how do you get past that? You get past that with kind of bigger trials, so more large-scale trials, and then additional placebo-controlled trials. So that's kind of some of the drawbacks right now with what we know that's out there in these trials. Just to summarize, we've got a big placebo effect right now that we have to kind of distill out, and we will distill that out in time. We just need to have more of the trials that are coming down the pipeline to produce those results, so we have more numbers of individuals who are in both the treatment groups and the placebo groups to analyze.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for that recap.
Sure.
I want to call out a couple of things. Firstly, a lot of you are sharing what works for you, what hasn't worked for you. And in the same way, psychedelic medicines might follow and will surely follow a similar trend. Psilocybin or cannabis, LSD, DMT, it might not all work for everyone, right? So in the same way that our conventional prescription medicine doesn't, it's not a one size fits all approach. I would encourage, you to approach psychedelic and plant medicines in the same way, with the same openness of, trying, and trying to find a groove with those medicines as well. I also want to call out that, psychedelics are being researched for other neurological disorders, different disorders that Evan is researching within his own practice with North Toronto Neurology. And we also have Kevin, who is the co-founder of the Psychedelics and Pain Association. We are going to move to questions in about a minute, but Kevin, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just quickly describe what that association is, what the mission is, and then Chelsea will be able to drop a link in the chat if people want to look into that further.
Great, thank you. So in addition, and I think I've got a little video lag, but hopefully you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to my work as a policy director for Clusterbusters, working with Bob Wold, who's the founder and executive director and is amazing in helping thousands of people with cluster headache and using psychedelics over the past 20 plus years. I now serve as the executive director of the Psychedelics and Pain Association. We'll put the URL in the chat, psychedelicsandpain.org. And what we're really trying to do is say we're seeing signal in a lot of studies of the potential of psychedelics for a wide range of pain conditions. And so we have databases of all the past research that's been done, and you can go and look at those lists and find the studies, and you can then Google the study names about a wide range of conditions. And as has been noted, a lot of these studies are small, and so they're not, large phase 3 clinical trials. So it's hard to say definitively meeting certain standards that these things work, but we see a really strong signal, and we're trying to advance more research in this area, working with companies to develop and do more trials to hopefully bring whether psychedelic substances or analogs of psychedelic substances to market would be great. Two of the companies in the cluster headache space that are working on trials, one is called Lobe Sciences. They have a subsidiary, Synaptic, that's looking at psilocin, which is a form of psilocybin for chronic cluster headache. And then there's another company, Ceruvia Life Sciences, looking at Bull 148, which is an analog derivative of LSD for cluster headache as well. So research is happening, and I've seen in the chat people talking about a number of universities in the US and internationally that are exploring psychedelics for a wide range of pain conditions.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, everyone, we're going to move to questions. There are a lot of questions. We're going to try to get through as many as possible, but we are sharing our email address with you. So if you did not get your question answered and you would like to reach out to us or to anyone on this webinar, we will happily take your questions and also forward them to those that you are trying to contact. So I'm going to kick it off here with a question here that says, I am a chronic cluster sufferer. I had to stop ketamine infusions due to severe pain in my stomach. When I tried to microdose, I experienced the same stomach pain. I do have gastroparesis and wondering if it could be the reason. Are there any thoughts? So I guess the question is speaking to this gastrointestinal pain and microdosing. And I think maybe I would venture to say, is there a relationship between that function and perhaps psychedelics?
Who wants to jump in there? I'll go first if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So with psilocybin, it is processed in the gut primarily, and then that works its way into the bloodstream and is converted into psilocin, which is what actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and is having effect on the various receptors. And that conversion can be challenging for a lot of people's digestion. So it makes sense that people are experiencing challenges. There are some techniques, it's called lemon tech, where you put lemon juice with the psilocybin, and people report sometimes that helps to make it an easier experience. If you're able to find psilocin instead of psilocybin, that can be easier. And then with the DMT, because that is inhaled, you're bypassing the digestive system. And I know there's a lot of chat in the chat there about the challenges of sourcing, and it's a real problem. And that's why I know the Microdosing Collective, as well as Clusterbusters and PPA, is doing policy advocacy work, trying to push towards legal access for substances that are tested and regulated so people can know what they're actually getting and the dosing amount so that we increase safety. But it is a challenge for people right now.
Thanks, Kevin. There's a question here about microdosing. I'm going to quickly address this one in case many of you have this question about what is microdosing. So we've talked about different dosing strategies. When we refer to microdosing, we're talking about subhallucinogenic doses that don't alter your perception, doses that allow for you to go about your day and your responsibilities unaffected. For some people, those are completely subperceptual, meaning you don't even notice them. It's as if you took a vitamin. For others, you might notice a little something in your perception, but it's not so distracting that you can't carry out your everyday. Above microdosing, sometimes we say low dose. Some people say mini dose. And that's when you start to experience the effects. You might not be having a hallucinogenic trip or journey. You might be able to go about some of your responsibilities, but you are very aware of the presence of the psychedelic that you've ingested that day. And then when we talk about macro dosing or heroic dosing, we're talking above 3 to 5 grams, where you usually are really taking into consideration your set and your setting, and you're setting aside time to have a journey. Perhaps you're accompanied or guided. And that's with higher doses. So I just wanted to quickly shed light on those 3 categories. Of course, there are things in between. And something important to note with microdosing, which is different than macrodosing, is that with microdosing, people will follow a regimen. So perhaps they'll do it for a few days out of the week, take certain days off. Sometimes they stack with other medicinal mushrooms or vitamins like niacin, and they really follow a routine that can go on for 2 to 3 months before they take a break, cycle off, and maybe cycle back on. Okay. This question will be for Evan. There's some questions here about seizure disorders. There are questions about Parkinson's and psychedelics. And I'm wondering if maybe you can do a quick overview on what you know about these 2 syndromes.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not seeing the questions or the questions on seizures, but I can speak to Parkinson's.
If you click Q&A only, there was a question from someone that said, is this effective for seizure disorders? And then, do you know anything about psychedelics and Parkinson's disease? And there's been a couple.
Okay, great. Okay. So that's easy to answer. And if there's more elaborated questions, then just let me know. Okay, so first for Parkinson's, there's been a lot of interest for Parkinson's. So as far as I know, I think there's an open label trial. There was a pilot trial, which means that people knew that they were utilizing psychedelics. And that was in individuals who had mild, moderate Parkinson's disease, and it was to treat comorbid depression and anxiety. So I think the important things that came up there was that there was some improved effects in the anxiety and depression that went along with Parkinson's. And the important thing is it didn't exacerbate any of the potential cognitive impacts of Parkinson's disease and some of the aspects of psychosis. So those would be hallucinations and other elements of that can occur in Parkinson's disease. So it didn't make those worse. So that was a good signal for Parkinson's. And then there's some thinking, given the how Parkinson's arises in the brain and how it interferes with the way serotonin is processed in the brain and dopamine is processed in the brain, that there might be a role for psychedelics in perhaps reducing the speed in which Parkinson's impacts the brain. And so that's to be determined, and we don't know. We don't have a clue. So really, to summarize that, it's just really with the comorbid anxiety and depression. That's the only evidence we have now in terms of psychedelics. It's specifically psilocybin for Parkinson's. Now, when it comes to seizures, that's a bit more complicated. So you've got to consider kind of the different psychedelics that exist, but really in short, there are two types of seizures. There are epileptic seizures, and then there are other seizures that we would classify as functional seizures or dissociative spells. So there is a lot of emerging research and frameworks that certainly indicate that psychedelics might be a treatment for functional seizures. So these are seizures that are not due to epilepsy. And that's a very strong, that's an area of my strong interest. And Stephanie, you and I have worked together in some work there in terms of that. So that's an area I'm fascinated in and actually working to explore. On the other side, we have epileptic seizures, and these are seizures due to epilepsy. So right now, no, psychedelics are not a treatment for these. They have a different mechanism by which they evolve in the brain. However, there is some basic science research, and there's one of the students who worked with me, Brendan Rabinovich, has done some good work in looking at mouse brain slices and the impact of LSD when there are full-blown seizures. So these seizures, when they continue and progress for a long period of time, it's called status epilepticus. This is ongoing seizure activity. So he's showing that a reduction in the epileptic activity in mice and some of the brain slices with LSD, which is a really interesting signal. Tons of work though that needs to be done there, and so no, we don't have anything further that would indicate that psilocybin or any of the classical psychedelics would be a treatment for epileptic seizures.
Thanks, Evan. There's a question here that would be directed for Joe. So there's someone in the chat who is on active duty firefighter. I'm just asking about, your experience, how to engage with some of these medicines if there are active drug testing. What do you suggest? Are there support groups? Are there, just generally, how would you advise?
So I did not try psychedelics while I was an active firefighter. Had I known what I know today, I definitely would have, to be honest with you. Depending on where this person works, I don't believe, and I've never heard of anyone getting tested specifically for psilocybin. I know in the New York City Fire Department, Police Department, that's not something that gets tested. I'll refer back to the panel here as far as timing on how long the half-life is, but it's my understanding that it's out of your system pretty quick in like less than 24 hours. So my advice would be to get a couple of mutual exchanges of tours and have offer for a long weekend if you decide to partake in a psilocybin experience. But as far as I know, I don't know anyone that's been drug tested for psilocybin anywhere, to be honest with you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you're off camera or if you're off audio, just to mute yourself because we have a little bit of background noise. But thank you, Joe, for that. That's very helpful. Okay, I want to get through a couple more questions here. There's an interesting question here that says, can you share how the hypothalamus is impacted during an episode? I assume we're talking about cluster headaches here. Does anyone want to take that question? I think it's going to be you, Dr. Evan.
Yeah, the hypothalamus is involved mechanistically kind of in transmission of pain signals. So there's also other kind of areas of the hypothalamus that can be involved in the generation of signals for nausea as well. So, the hypothalamus is a big relay station for a lot of these signals, and kind of loops in and out with one of the main pathways, which is the trigeminal nerve, especially in migraine too, as well as in cluster headache. So it's kind of, you think of it as a relay station, and some of the things that we do see in terms of some of the symptoms within migraine and within cluster is the reason why, because the hypothalamus is involved. So it's kind of the best way to consider it without getting overly complicated. And then if everyone recalls some of the symptoms I mentioned for migraine and for cluster headache at the very beginning, as nausea being one of them, that's one of the things you can think about, kind of the relays there through the brain stem, which is also linked to the hypothalamus. So I think it's pretty complex kind of pathophysiology when you look into it, and hard to kind of describe in words without some nice figures for everybody. So I think that's pretty much what would be a nice kind of overview for the audience here.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that, if you don't mind, is the connection between the hypothalamus and regulating circadian rhythms, people going to sleep each night, and also the passage of seasons, which I think has a strong relationship with cluster headache and why it comes seasonally for people, or a lot of people get attacks at night, and there's an interplay there that's involved as well.
Thank you for that, Ad. I'm going to keep you on, Kevin, for a question here that's coming in. In the anecdotal reports and, the different stories that you've heard, the success stories that you've gathered, how are people selecting perhaps the strain of mushroom? Is there an impact on the strain? Have you seen any of that kind of data? And then when people are trying to, integrate psilocybin mushrooms into their regimen to try to treat the pain or to stop the cycles from happening, what do you recommend they do with their current prescription? Should they be consulting their physicians? Are people having to hold certain medications? What have you seen in the research?
Yeah, so we're early in understanding particular strains, if they work better or not. We are definitely getting much more insight into a much wider range of potency across different strains that are being used right now. So it used to be, as a rule of thumb, you could say, like 1 gram of dried mushroom. And there was, of course, some variation, but if you ground it up and you homogenized it, you generally knew what you were getting. Nowadays, some strains are 2 or 3 times as strong as common other strains. So we're trying to get more, and when people are purchasing, they can sometimes find out, that strain is known to be more potent, or the product is labeled. But again, it's not regulated, so there are challenges there. And I think that the potency is probably the biggest factor rather than the other things, but we don't have definitive answers. On terms of other medicines, it is complex. And I think you should always consult with your doctor. A lot of doctors are willing to have those conversations. They oftentimes feel like they can't specifically endorse, they certainly can't prescribe psychedelics, but they can explain the interactions with the other medicines that you are on. Serotonin-based medicines in particular work on those same receptors, and that's some of the headache medicines, some depression medicines that are used as well. And there's sort of a back and forth there if you need to wean off and if that's safe to do so, or if you need to increase the dose to get the therapeutic effect that you're looking for. And there's some rule of thumb advice on the Clusterbusters website, and I would encourage people to go there. But again, always talking with your doctor, starting there to get that input.
I'll add something on that, Kevin. Just on the Clusterbusters website, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up. There's a section called Playing Well Together. And there's a list of pharmaceutical medications that we suspect might interfere with the efficacy of psilocybin or LSD. I learned myself the hard way that opiates and steroids and triptans seem to be suspect. So I recommend going to the website and checking that out. And then, of course, absolutely speak to your doctor. Be as open and honest as possible about your use, or you're willing to try the use of psychedelics. So talk to your doctor, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And as we wrap, I will say a lot of people are asking for resources and how to source. I will mention that there are places and states and cities in the United States where psilocybin centers, psilocybin therapy centers have been made legal, like Oregon and Colorado. And if a setting like that feels more comfortable to you, I encourage you to seek out a consultation with some of these centers. There's so much to cover. And so, as I mentioned, we do remain available via email. Chelsea will do a good job of sending all of those links to you. Feel free to reach out to us with your questions. We will field through that as best as we can and get back to you as quickly as we can. But thank you so much for tuning. Thank you, Kevin, Joe, and Evan. I know that you might want to do a little quick call out to your organization. So let's give you guys just 30 seconds to do that right now. Kevin, do you want to go first?
Yeah. First, thank you, Microdosing Collective, for hosting this great conversation. Hope we provided a lot of useful information for the audience, and for people who want to continue learning more. A lot of links have been shared in the chat. Please join the mailing list for the two websites, Clusterbusters and the Psychedelics and Pain Association. And we regularly send out information, and you can write to the info accounts at either of those organizations with your specific questions. And we do our best to respond to every question that comes in. So we look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work. Evan, want to call out our research or any other ongoing initiatives that you have?
Yeah, sure. And likewise, thanks to Microdosing Collective. And it was a great conversation. So Joe and Kevin, pleasure to meet you both here and hear, Joe, your story, and Kevin, all the amazing work that Clusterbusters has done and is doing. And for everybody out there. So North Toronto Neurology is kind of the home where I work and do my psychedelic research and psychedelic work. I'm partnered with another organization called North Toronto Psychology, and together we are going to be launching the first at-home ketamine therapy, ketamine-assisted therapy program and psychedelic-assisted therapy program in Ontario, where we will be treating patients in their home with a nurse in the home with the patient. So very different from some of the models that you've seen before, where people do it on their own and are virtually connected. This is going to be a nurse in the home with patients while they are undergoing psychedelic therapy and or ketamine assisted therapy, because in Canada we do have access to MDMA and psilocybin through the special access program. So that's kind of a big initiative on the clinical side. So it's homeward therapy, and Chelsea has put the link to the website on the bottom there. And then again, just a shout out to everybody. Please look for our headache survey and psychedelics that Stephanie and I have been working on. Encouraging you to join. It would be fantastic for us to have more people, and please do share it amongst kind of people you might know that would be helpful to gather all that amazing information. So, like Kevin showed you, the power of survey data and where we can really move this, move the needle forward in finding treatments that work for people who are suffering out there. So thanks everybody, and thanks again, Steph.
Thank you. And I see many people saying they wish they lived in Canada. I want to encourage people to reach out to Dr. Evan Lewis. He has a website, and reach out if you have questions. Joe.
Real quick, Kevin touched on a lot of things. I just want to thank Microdosing Collective. You guys have been great. Also, Psychedelics and Pain Association. And I did notice something in the chat about someone asking about how to get involved in advocacy. I'll just say, if you're in a position where you can speak openly about psychedelic use as a treatment for cluster headache, please reach out to us. We're gathering advocates and people to share their stories about how it's impacted their lives at a state level and at a federal level as well. Reach out to us at Clusterbusters, and we'll hopefully we can get you a platform to speak. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate all of you tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you on behalf of the Microdosing Collective. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right.